Hi and hello. My name is Mary Yusevich, and welcome to another program of NEWIE's latest virtual programming called Ask Me Anything. And as I said, my name is Mary Yusevich, and I am a member of the NEWIE board, and I'm honored to be the moderator of today's Ask Me Anything with a great conversation with Chairwoman Marissa Paslick Gillett. Today's Ask Me Anything is just one of a series of conversations that NEWIE's been having regularly on the second Wednesday of the month with some of the top leaders of women in environment and energy. If this is your first time joining us for the program Ask Me Anything, please go to the NEWIE.org website. We'll have all the listings of not only this program, but other ones. And the future Ask Me Anything is on May 12th with the FERC Commissioner, Alyssa Clemens. I want to thank our sponsors who have been gracious in sponsoring all of our events that are virtual. There are year-long event sponsors. That is Eversource, First Light, Mass Clean Energy Center, and Robinson Cove. NEWIE launched this program at the beginning of the COVID outbreak, and it's been well received, and we like to continue the program because we've been having fantastic speakers, and we'll have another one tonight. If you like, it is called Ask Me Anything because you get to ask the questions of the person who is being featured tonight. And how do you do that? You can go down in your screen to the Q&A section, not the chat, but the Q&A, and put in your questions. The questions can be either anonymous or you can identify yourself. So I would like to make sure the program really becomes successful when you ask the questions. So please do ask questions and we will make sure we get to them, as many as we can. I also want to highlight some upcoming fantastic events that we have coming right to you very shortly. One is next week on March 17th, we have the ABCs of ESG. Now, what is ESG? Well, when you want to know about a company and how well they do, sometimes we just look at the finances. And these ladies are going to talk about that. No, we should be looking at companies and looking at their environmental, social, and governance to determine about how we want to support these different companies. If you want to learn more about this type of analysis of companies and understanding their communication systems, you definitely want to tune into the ABCs of ESG with Cindy Gage. I think it's going to be a wonderful program. Then we have also one of our regional chapter programs on March 24th called Planning for Climate Resilience on the Local Level. And I think this is going to be, again, another great opportunity to not only highlight one of our regional chapters, this one being Western Mass, but understanding how some of these issues start at the grassroots level. And finally, last year, we could not hold our annual event due to COVID, but we have decided to move forward at NEWIE and do the 10th year anniversary. Unfortunately, it's going to be virtual, but it's going to be Thursday, April 29th from 4 to 6. It is a fantastic event, and you are going to be, I think, very pleased and surprised, not only by the awardees, but how we're going to try to replicate the wonderful networking that we normally have for our 10-year anniversary. So now I'd like to turn and welcome my guest for this afternoon, Chairwoman Gillett. Thank you so much for joining us. This is so great. We just really appreciate it. We know how busy you are, and this is wonderful because it really gives us an opportunity to get to know you and allow our NEWIE audience to get a chance to ask you some questions. So, a woman that was working in Maryland Public Service Commission gets to get to be the chairwoman of PURA in Connecticut. So can you give us how that journey happened?
Sure. I love this question because I think it illustrates just how both how small the industry is, as well as how many opportunities are out there that I hope folks take advantage of throughout their careers. When I was at the Maryland Public Service Commission, I had the good fortune, I think, to network with a lot of the regional counterparts in New England through my work on the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which both Maryland and Connecticut were a part of, and kept in touch with both staff that work at my agency now, as well as Commissioner Dykes, both in her role at DEEP and when she was at PURA herself. And I had a brief stopover after my tenure at the Maryland Public Service Commission. I was the senior advisor to the chairman there. Got to work on a lot of fantastic things, from offshore wind to advanced metering infrastructure. And as his tenure wrapped up there, I thought it was time to move on. I had a brief, about 18-month tenure with the Energy Storage Association, which is the National Trade Association for Energy Storage. And Governor Lamont and his team reached out about a year and a couple months into my time with ESA, really looking to do something different in Connecticut. The governor, I'm not his only out-of-state recruit. He was very interested in bringing outside perspectives, and I really applaud him for that, because I think the state's benefiting from fresh look at things. And they interviewed. It was a good time for my family and I, and picked up and moved to Connecticut just about 2 years ago. So really thrilled to be here.
Well, that's wonderful. And surviving our winters, because, Maryland is on that cusp. It's not cold, but it's not also Florida, but we do have cold here.
Yes. Well, the first winter I was here, I think they did it on purpose. The first winter I was here was a very mild winter. So
you thought this is a piece of cake.
Yeah.
Well, I would raise weather because I do want to get into the Texas thing. But before I do that, there's a bit of a confusion people have, because you have DEEP and then you have PURA. So could you explain to our audience, what's the difference between the DEEP and PURA, just so they understand that world?
Sure, I'm happy to. So about a decade ago, clearly before my tenure here, Connecticut looked at its energy and environment policy and decided to create a new agency. They took the DEP, which was focused on environmental work, and created DEEP, which stands for the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, and then created, PURA out of the former commission there. And in doing so, split up jurisdiction on a number of things. So PURA, if you're familiar with regulatory agencies across the country, we mirror the same types of jurisdiction that other commissions do, with respect to our utilities and rate making and grid mod and everything under the sun with respect to the distribution of commodities within our state. Where DEEP comes into it is they have a bureau that is focused on energy policy development. So they've been really tasked with representing the governor, whomever that may be, representing the governor's policy as a party before PURA. They also have primary jurisdiction for implementing the state's energy efficiency programs and running procurements for grid scale resources. So you can think of them more as developing the integrated resources plan, and PURA tasked with figuring out how to implement it. I think that's the best way to describe that.
Thank you so much for explaining that, because I want people who ask questions to kind of direct their questions to the things that you highlighted, which is under your jurisdiction. I do also have to tell people that some questions, if it's a proceeding before the commission, unfortunately, the chairwoman might not be able to answer that, but we'll address that as the questions arise. So let's dive a little deeper into weather, because we had an event down in Texas that I've heard people say, oh, no, never could happen here in the Northeast. And I've heard other people say, well, you know what? Don't be so sure of that. I'd love your perspective on that, because that PUC down in Texas has been taking a lot of hot water over, did they see this? Could they have prepared? So I'd love to get your perspective on that, if you don't mind sharing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll caveat it by saying that I know that the investigations probably will go on for months, if not years, into really unpacking it. But from my perspective, I can relate to some degree, both from the experience that we had down in Maryland after the 2011 derecho. We had the polar vortex in Maryland, just like in New England did. And then more recently, Connecticut experienced, a devastating tropical storm last August. And the reason I'm bringing these up is because from my perspective, no matter what caused the outage, or outages in Texas versus what caused the outages that I was just alluding to in New England, from a customer's perspective, I'm not sure that they care. They just care that their power's out. They don't care whether it was a failure of the distribution system or if it was a failure of the reliability at the wholesale level. They just know their power is out. We care as regulators, of course, because the solutions in many ways, while they're always going to be interrelated, the solutions are going to be unique. And I think we have some things going for us in New England that Texas doesn't, like a grid that's interconnected to other states for starters. But whether what happened in Texas could happen here, I think absolutely. I think we're all vulnerable and susceptible, no matter what the cause of the outage is. And what we're focused on, at PURA is increasing the resilience at the individual customers level, because again, I just personally don't think that they care what the cause of that outage was. So we, of course, are maintaining our activities with respect to the ISO. We've got some things going for us in addition to being interconnected to the regional grid. Our plants have also winterized, which I think we're hearing Texas hadn't. So there's some clear differences, but I definitely don't want to be the one that says that couldn't happen in Connecticut. I think anything could happen here. It's just making sure that we're positioned so that our ratepayers can be more resilient.
And Connecticut has had some bad situations many years ago, even before you came to PURA. So what do you see as some of the top priorities that you want to put into place? You said to provide that resiliency for the ratepayers so that they can feel confident that when they need power, the power is going to be there. And we understand sometimes there is power outage, but how can you minimize that outage too?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. When the governor recruited me here, it was under the premise that the infrastructure in Connecticut and really throughout New England is, vastly outdated, if you will. We, don't have advanced metering infrastructure in our largest utility in the state. And I think we're just, Connecticut's response to the storms of 2011 was to go wholesale into vegetation management. We're I think the 5th most densely wooded state, and there's a lot of trees. And as everyone knows, trees are the #1 outage causer. So I think from my perspective, my priorities for 10 years so far and for the remainder of it are going to lie in modernizing both the distribution infrastructure as well as PURA's approach to regulating it. And I frequently say that I think historically PURA, if you're thinking about an analogy of are you in the driver's seat or the passenger seat, and I've said previously, I'm not sure that PURA was even in the car. And so I'm trying to move us at least into the car so that we're playing a more active role in how we see things evolve in Connecticut, because we also have, the highest electricity rates on a per kilowatt hour basis in the country. And so we're going to face some real challenges about our customers, willingness to pay at a time where we need a lot more investment. So that's a long-winded way of answering that question, but the priorities lie there.
Well, that's great. And as everyone knows on Ask Me Anything, I always like to get to know the person as well as the policy or the regulation in your case. So I'd like to turn to some questions more on the personal side. I know you have twins, correct? Because we've talked about them, and it's great because that's the wonderful thing about women. We love to share about our children and how they're doing. COVID, this must have added a new element to have twins, be a chairwoman of a very busy agency, and also, basically struggling with work and and if you want to share, I don't know the age of your twins, but did you also have to combat with all the homeschooling that was going on in Connecticut?
Yeah, so I have boy-girl twins. They are 4 years old, and they enrolled in public pre-K, which promptly shut down, I think like everybody else's did. The first part of the pandemic, we were riding high. Our daycare stayed open. Things were looking up in the Gillett household, but when September hit, we were facing the same struggles that everyone was with respect to homeschooling. Our school has, thankfully, I think from my perspective, gone back, and the kids are in full time now. But challenging as it may have been, I will say that my balance has gotten better in Connecticut. When I was in Maryland commuting to DC, I spent 5 hours a day in the car.
Oh my goodness.
The 11-minute commute that I have here was always going to make the balance better for me. But yeah, happy to talk more about what it's like to balance. But but the kids are they're a handful, but they are really cute. So
well, it sounds a boy and a girl, 4 years old. Those are the perfect ages. They actually love you, and they say I love you every day. It's when they get older and they're the teenagers. I won't tell you, because you have to appreciate the time you have now. So we do have some questions coming in, Chairwoman, that I'd like to turn to. And this is Celeste Fay. She's a civil engineer and regulatory manager at Gravity Renewables. And they are a small owner of a small hydro in Connecticut. And she grew up in a family with hydro business. Her dad felt strongly I should participate in everything from surveying to machine turbines. So this is wonderful. I love, Celeste, we love the fact that you're in the STEM as a woman. We're big in NEWIEE on trying to increase the amount of diversity in our industry. But she has a question about hydropower, and she wants to know that these clean electrons, as well as the community benefits they create this waterfront property that wasn't there before. They're also Black Start, provide frequency controls. How do you see hydro fitting into Connecticut's clean energy future? And how can we further gauge that? And I think that's a really good question, because let's talk about the mix, and how we can diversity, even in work, like having more women as part of the workforce. So diversity of the generation supply.
Yeah, first of all, I also applaud Celeste. My parents owned a mechanical, electrical, plumbing firm, and I too grew up going on surveys.
Oh, wow.
And trained as an engineer. So I love to hear similar stories like that. It lends a whole new viewpoint. Hydropower, I think, to be frank, that we're probably going to face as a nation uphill struggles in permitting new types of those resources, but for resources that already exist, and I think we have a huge one. I want to say it's in Massachusetts. That might be a pumped hydro there.
We do have one in Mass that is a pump hydro. Yep, yeah. First Light Power.
Right. And I am a big believer in maximizing resources that we have, and I think that I've heard a lot about that resource and how it's being perhaps underutilized. So I would love to see, Connecticut focus on, we've got some small hydro here that was the subject of a lot of public hearings in the legislature recently. I'm a huge believer in diversifying the fuel mix, and hydro to me has a clear role. So I don't know if Celeste's question is about large hydro or small hydro, but I would say that to the extent that it is small hydro, one thing that you could do is engage directly with PURA. We have a successor docket open right now. The docket number is 20-07-01. And if you're interested in trying to figure out how small hydro could fit into the mix of a successor virtual net metering program, happy to have you as a stakeholder in that proceeding. Yeah, that's So maybe I'll stop
Oh,
there.
that's great. Well, Celeste, I think you got some valuable information there, and thank you for asking the question. Let's turn to the fact on diversity a little bit in the workforce. You're a bioengineer in terms of your undergraduate degree. How do we get more women involved in this industry? This is something it is working on right now. It's diversity and inclusion, and we've kind of made it a real key component of our efforts. I'd love to hear your point of view on how we can get more women involved in this industry.
Yeah, I'm constantly asking myself the same question. One of the things that I noticed when I came to Connecticut, I was surprised, to be frank, that the diversity within PURA itself was less than what we had at the Maryland Commission. And I don't know that there, is anything to attribute that to. But it was just the reality of the situation as I walked into the room to meet my manager team, my first day, and I saw one female of a team of 14, 15, mid to upper management. So one thing that I'm always, conscious of is, making sure that you're bringing women along with you and making sure that you're opening up opportunities that they know to apply for. Because I think, women don't always put themselves forward for promotional opportunities. They don't always think that they are ready in their career, or they're worried that they can't balance it with their home life. And I'm pleased to say that we've tripled the number of women on our management team, which is not hard when you started with one. So I think that we really need to be cognizant of mentoring women, because I think as female leaders, we're going to be judged by, not just what we do, but how many women that we bring along with us. And I'm really trying to live that out and take that to heart.
Well, and we appreciate that, because we have a saying when we started NEWIEE 13 years ago, that the reason we started NEWIEE was when you went to conferences on energy, there was never a line in the ladies' room. So we want lines in the ladies' room to show that there's more than a handful of us present. So we appreciate the efforts that you've done, and we encourage any of the women that are listening to please put in your Q&A any further follow-up questions you have on that train of thought. We do have another question that came in. If you had to take one policy that you worked on in Maryland that you thought was very successful and bringing it to Connecticut, what would that policy be?
I think that we have brought some of them here. I think any true regulatory nerd that followed some of the work that I did in Maryland will see it replicated in some of our grid mod dockets here. But besides that, it's not so much a policy, but a perspective. And I think that perspective is, I'm not sure that we're adequately measuring things in Connecticut. And I mean that across the board. And being transparent in how we're going to measure. And the Connecticut legislature, through their Take Back Our Grid Act last fall, has directed PURA to start looking into performance-based regulation. And I see as a precursor to that, making sure that we start setting up metrics, whether it's metrics like traditional ones in the reliability space that PURA adjudicates and then holds folks to, or whether it's more creative metrics. I think that's something that we frankly did a better job at in Maryland than I think that we're doing here. And I'd love to copy that thinking and that approach and plop it in here. And I think that's what we're working toward.
Well, that's awesome, because the next question has to talk about, again, Maryland. I guess it's unique that there's somebody was in another state regulatory agency and now is in another state regulatory agency. And I have to say that it is very innovative on your governor's point to bring people from the outside perspective. So I hope you don't mind if we ask another question that kind of works on that same train of thought. Solar. and the concept of using more solar, say, on farmland. In Maryland, I've been to Maryland. You have a lot of farms in Maryland. Do you see this being a good use of solar to create these solar farms and use agricultural land?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'd say in Maryland, where we started to tackle that when I was still there was we undertook a value of distributed resources study that sought to place a value and differentiate so that the commission could, if it wanted to, look at different types of adders to, if our policy is not to cite on ag land, what the appropriate adder or incentive should be to incentivize on brownfields, for example. So we didn't, I think that's probably the closest I got to having experience directly on the issue in Maryland. Here, it's clear to me that there are, there's a push and pull between the various state policies, and agricultural land, despite how forested we are as a state, which I think, or not despite, but because of that, I think, there's a premium placed on agricultural land in this state. And, it's a battle that's ongoing in the legislature right now. So I definitely don't want to preempt those conversations, but I do think that there's got to be a reckoning between what the state's policy goals are and how those policies align, and that sometimes when the different state agencies are working in silos, that can definitely be problematic for developers and communities alike. So I don't have a magic bullet, but I am painfully aware of the problem.
Well, it's interesting to go back to your resume. You're got an engineering, and then you have a law degree too. Do you think women, do you feel that those are the skill sets that we need to get into roles such as yourself, or do you think that, so if I wanted to become, say, a regulator or a commissioner, do you think that that's what I should be looking at for my career choice, or are there other, other ways, other paths to that, to those opportunities?
Yeah, it's a great question. My mentor, who I'm sure that many folks in this crowd know, is Kelly Speaks Backman, who is now in the senior leadership team of DOE. And I don't think Kelly would mind me disclosing this, but she has a bachelor's degree. She does not have an advanced degree. And I'd say that she is one of the most respected, women in her field. And so I don't think people should be discouraged from pursuing, some of these advanced positions if they don't have accelerated or advanced degrees rather. I personally really liked the combination of engineering and law. I think that helps me unpack how to apply policies in the regulatory environment. So I'd be happy to talk to anybody about replicate or understanding what it was like to go from engineering to law school. But there are definitely many paths to getting to the end goal. I thought I wanted to be an intellectual property attorney, and here I am. I'm not sure those two things have much to do with each other. So yeah, I'd be happy to talk to anybody about their different pathways. I think it's never too late to, we need more people interested in the public policy side of things, including folks that have had private realm experience. So happy to talk to anyone about that anytime.
Well, you have other people in Connecticut that are in leadership positions in Washington now under the Biden administration. The Secretary of Education is from your your state too, Connecticut. So any thoughts of doing some crossover with your relationship with the new Secretary on Education and trying to get people to understand where their energy comes from, since there seems to be a lot of confusion as to actually how the lights get turned on?
Yeah, I love that question. One of PURA's initiatives over the past 8 months is we stood up a whole office. I mean, it's called Education Outreach and Enforcement. So education prominently in the name. And, I think if we can't educate folks about who PURA is and what we do, I love for them to walk away understanding a little bit more about their electricity bill, at least. Whether I think that there is an opportunity to do some crossover in the K through 12 programming, especially getting them interested when they're young. I spend a lot of time personally talking to college students in the state, trying to recruit them into working and the regulatory environment, especially. So I will definitely be reaching out to Secretary Cardona and seeing if there is some overlap there, because you should definitely take advantage of the connections you have, right? Why not?
Exactly. Hey, you know what? It's all about timing, and if you have those connections, definitely, because I do think it's important that people understand more about energy. Because would you say this statement is correct, that it's complicated, more complicated than, say, 20 years ago when it was vertically integrated? You had a power station, you had lines, you had, a meter in your house. So,
100%. I mean, and then you add the layer on of deregulation, and then trying to explain to somebody why they can have competition here and not there, and who procures their resources, and why their procurements are showing up on the delivery side of their bill. Like, it's just an endless amount of questions, and it's frustrating. And I think we've seen that frustration from our ratepayers kind of bubble up in mass just over the last year even.
Well, and that's where I'm leading to one question from Erica Dahl. She says, what are your thoughts on the state of residential solar in Connecticut? So we talked a little bit about solar farms, but is there a place for residential solar? And then, maybe even if you could talk a little bit more about that, how do you deal with the interconnection issue, and how to manage all this distributive resources?
Yeah, so I am a huge believer in decentralizing our grid, and residential solar as a distributed energy resource. It would follow that I would think that is a huge component, and I do. PURA just issued a decision in our successor docket to net metering that I think lays the groundwork for. We think the way that that's been set up will encourage the continued deployment of 50 to 60 megawatts of residential solar each year for the next 7 years. And I take that seriously. And I think that's the direction that we need to go as a state, is empowering our ratepayers to have the resilience for themselves. And we also have a grid mod docket open right now for storage. And our Connecticut Green Bank has put before us a solarized, what are they calling it? A solarized storage program. I'm sorry, if Brian Garcia ever hears this, he's gonna be upset I messed up their name. But
the point is, say anything. You did a perfect job.
The point being that we think that's a path forward too. And I'm not sure that this state has, done the best job in standing up that market, and I'm hoping to change that through these initiatives. And yeah, I'm just looking forward to our mission is sustained orderly development of that industry, and I'm really take to heart that mission and trying to get there.
Well, I love when you were talking earlier about when Governor Lamont wanted you to come here, he wanted you to modernize the system and bring it into the 21st century. So I know that PURA is in the process of rolling out a new electronic filing system. This is one of the questions we have from one of our viewers. And can you comment on when that might go live? I mean, or has the COVID thing have delayed it? So if you just mind giving us an update, if you can.
Yeah, it's a great question. So is another thing that I noticed when I came to Connecticut from Maryland. Maryland's had an e-filing system for years, and when I started here 2 years ago, our database, which is the lifeline of the agency, is a program called Lotus Notes, which I think is older than I am, and I mean that in all seriousness. And anyone that's ever tried to navigate the PURA docket system has probably encountered how clunky it is. So a couple of years ago, Deep thought to put together a new, what they call an e-filing system. It's a project that's run by that agency. PURA is embedded in it. So unfortunately, I don't have any say over the timeline or how that's going to launch. I think we continue to work through some both internal and external testing. I had high hopes that it was going to launch in the first half of this year, kind of rip the Band-Aid off and move into the NEWIEE system, but I don't have a hard date, and we're going to do our best to communicate as far in advance with our stakeholders as we can when we do have that date.
Well, it's good that you recognize it and you're doing something, so thank you for that. I have a question here that I'm dealing with internships, a personal question. In high school, did you have an internship? And if so, can you share that with us? Because what the person who's asking the question is, are you a proponent of having high school internships? So that young women and men, but we're emphasizing women on this program, is to have a chance to see what it's like to be involved in an energy environment issues.
Yeah, so I had an informal internship. I worked for my father for, as I was mentioning earlier, going out on jobs and doing electrical surveys and understanding how to install fire alarm systems. So I had kind of.
That is so cool. Now, are you an only child, or do you have other siblings?
I have a younger sister.
And did she go too, or did she follow after you, or no? She didn't want anything to do with it.
No, we're completely opposites.
Okay.
She's much smarter than me, but does language skills.
Well, I would challenge that, but go on. So you were your dad's intern, yep.
Yeah, I was his built-in intern from like age 12 until I fled to college. No, I loved working for him. So, but I think if I hadn't had, and he did take on high school interns. And I grew up in Northern Virginia, and they had, public schools that had technical programs. So you could spend your free period working on whatever that school specialized in. And his company took on other high school interns. And I think really, and one of them became a full-time employee of their small business when he graduated college. So I see a lot of value in that. I certainly, had I not been exposed to that kind of work, would have probably not thought that I was capable of math and science. Like you have to be exposed in order to even think of that
right.
as, an option. So I don't know that PURA is currently, I don't know that we've thought a lot about recruiting high school interns. It might not be the best environment, but I'd love for people to shadow me. So
well, that's great. And I'd like to do a shout out to NEWIEE, because we do have a mentoring program. We're starting our next round of it. And we've had tremendous success. So we know that people, the cutoff date has passed for the mentor or mentee. I hope that the next round, Chairwoman, we might ask you if you could help us be a mentor, because that is awesome that we get a chance like that. So I guess the other question I want to get into there is this PURA is a huge, large organization. I know that you did the breakup of the Deep with the PURA and solidified it, but were there no objections to basically money and staffing and the funding question people have, or what changes would you make thinking of reducing cost, since you had mentioned in one of the earlier questions that, we have some of the highest costs in Connecticut for energy. So is there an area where you could help contribute to reduce that? Then that's a question from Kate Bosher.
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think, and I've been spending a lot of time, educating our legislators on this, because PURA, like I think probably most every regulatory commission, isn't paid for out of general funds. I don't know if people know this, but your commission is at least it was this way in Maryland, it's this way in Connecticut, and I just assume it's this way everywhere, but we're funded through an assessment on a utility bill. So, it's that's one unique thing, and convincing the legislators that every staff person that you assign to a regulatory agency will generate, an exponential amount of savings to ratepayers is something that we're trying to document. We did so in a memo that it was put together about outside counsel we retained to work on FERC matters, and how X amount of money invested in that generated X number of dollars in savings for ratepayers. And I think that that's what you're going to get if you staff up. It's just more eyes on regulated entities, and I don't mean this in a disparaging way to them. They're doing their job, but they can bury you in data, and we need to invest in resources that we can grow up through our organization too. So if I had my druthers, I definitely would increase, both the engineering and legal capacities within PURA. As a quasi-judicial agency, when I got here, we had 5 lawyers out of 70. It was like less than 10% of our agency were lawyers. I think that we could focus there, and I'm spending a lot of time trying to convince folks to increase PURA staffing, because we're actually really not that large of an organization. We have 70 people. We do water, gas, electric, electric suppliers, gas pipeline safety, you name it, everything but taxi cabs, which we did do in Maryland, and I'm happy to not do here, but anyway.
Yeah, Massachusetts did Uber and Lyft. You didn't get those, right?
We did them in Maryland, and I thought, if I have to do that again here, I might quit, so.
Well, we don't want to lose you, so we're going to all send letters to the governor saying, no, don't give her the taxi cab and the Uber and Lyft groups. I guess going back to a little bit about your favorite subject, which I know we've had conversations on storage. Can you talk about why there seems to be a disconnect with everybody wanting to develop a lot of renewables, and a lot of them are intermittent, and then not so much emphasis on storage? Can you try to figure out why there is that, we have an intermittent supply and yet we're not doing as much? And I thought it would be great because you headed up the National Energy Storage Association, so.
Yeah, it's a great question. It was actually specifically my job when I was at ESA. It was external relations and focusing on educating, both regulators and the regulated entities. And I remember distinctly the first NARUC I went to after I transitioned to ESA, and the regulators at this ESA breakfast were saying, well, we can't possibly be doing storage because that's not going to be cost competitive with other resources for another decade. And I think one of the biggest myths, and I will call it a myth, is that storage isn't cost competitive. And you can debunk that pretty easily by looking at what's going on the West Coast, where California, Nevada, Arizona, a lot of those states have procured solar plus storage on a grid scale that was cost competitive, actually overperform compared to natural gas peakers. So I think it's going to take a little bit of education, both about of regulators in particular, about cost of these resources, but the benefits. And I think it's hard for a regulator to understand all the different value streams. It's easy to say value stream, and it's harder for them to wrap their head around. Okay, so you're telling me there's all these different value streams. How does that overlap with FERC jurisdiction? It's just a lot to unpack. And I'd really challenge, ESA, now that I'm not there, as, Will's the folks that are in those, in that industry, that's going to be a continuing, education requirement of policymakers. But I think that's where some of the disconnect lies, is like, is this cost competitive, and what can storage really do?
And is there a misunderstanding of what is storage? Because there's a lot of different storages. We already mentioned the pump storage with Celeste's question, and then also First Light that you talked about, and then we have other storage, which is of course the lithium battery. But there's some people talking about hydrogen, that could be another resource of storage. So would you like to talk about the different storages, and are some like, they're pie in the sky, and others that are, what the challenges are with them? If you could drill down a little bit more on that, since that's an area that you have a lot of knowledge on.
Sure. I mean, when you think of storage, and that's why I was thankful for the question about pumped hydro, because I think folks that definitely doesn't come to mind. That what comes to mind when you say storage, I think, is batteries. And of batteries, and I think the last statistic was 98% of the batteries that are deployed today are lithium ion. So it's definitely what people are the most comfortable with. It's probably the electric storage that has reached commercial scale the most. There are clearly other types of storage, whether it's other chemistries of batteries, flywheels, if you've ever seen a flywheel, those exist. There's also thermal storage, can be ice storage, and then things that you would think of as, as demand response. When aggregated, actually can work as storage. So by that, there's an innovative program in one of the California jurisdictions just a year ago, where I want to say it was San Diego Gas and Electric, but it might have been a different one, where they literally pre-cooled like 10% of the homes in their service territory, and then bid that in as if it was a battery into the market ahead of the peak. So I think the thing about storage is there's just so many different ways, that different forms and different ways it can perform. And the ones that are, further out from commercial scale, some of the longer duration types of storage, that's where I think DOE comes in. They have, ARPA-E, like they've got some great funds set aside to develop some of those newer storage. But there's storage, certainly lithium ion is scalable and commercially available today, as are some of the other options. And pump storage, that's not going away either. So
no. Well, one thing that we are looking at in Massachusetts that a lot of people are talking about in the decarbonization plan is natural gas, and is that going to go away? Can you talk a little bit about what you see as the future of natural gas in Connecticut? I mean, is it the bridge fuel? Is it, going to play a role at all come 2050? I mean, if you could just tell me what your thoughts are.
Sure. So I think that's a really interesting question. There have been some studies that have been asked for or undertaken recently. I think they're going in California. There might have even been a request in Massachusetts by your AG, if I'm not mistaken, asking the Regulatory Commission to kind of take up this issue from the perspective of stranded costs. And I think that is something that a Regulatory Commission is appropriately situated to do. So taking it up from the perspective of informing policymakers about the ramifications of the different choices. So the last administration in Connecticut was very focused on gas expansion. There's a comprehensive energy strategy that's binding today. And PURA is tasked with implementing that. So we have a program that's ongoing. If an administration were to change course, what does that mean to our ratepayers and the resources that have been invested? I think it's a fair question for, folks to consider the different paths and the different costs associated with those different paths. So I'm not sure that I myself will take a position on what I think, if natural gas is the transition or the bridge fuel or what have you. I think my role is more appropriately in trying to unpack and inform people about the cost of the different approaches. So that's, I don't know, how's that for a non-answer?
No, that's a good answer, because it is, I think it demonstrates what you've been saying all along, that you're putting the ratepayer, for front and center and thinking about how will these decisions impact them in terms of costs. And you're right. I mean, there was a time where we did put a lot of emphasis on safety and expansion of the system, and you said it correctly. Then how does that calculate out of stranded assets? So very good point. I think we're at the crossroads, and I'm glad that you're recognizing that we need to ask the right questions to get the right answers. So thank you. That is a very good question, very good response. I guess as we start to get closer towards the time, if you were to encourage some women to get into this industry, because we love to do our young professional questions. I mean, what is it about energy that attract you? I mean, you said this was not the path that you originally decided for yourself. And now here you are developing energy, being the regulator, the top regulator, to ensure that energy policy is carried through. So, I mean, like, what made the change, and how could some other women look at this for their options for themselves?
Sure, I love that question. I got into the energy industry as a intern. It was the first class of interns that NEWIEE sponsored through their policy grants that I think are ongoing today. And they assigned me to the Maryland Public Service Commission when I was in my second year of law school. I applied for that internship on a whim and kind of never looked back after discovering that there's a lot about energy that kind of attracted me to engineering in the first place. I've always really liked the idea of trying to take something complicated and making it accessible, especially something that is an essential service that we're basically in an environment today where we're telling people you have to use energy, you have to use water, and you're probably in a position where you need gas too if you're heating that way. So the idea that we have these essential services that people don't understand, kind of like sticks in my craw, if you will, and I really enjoyed being in a position where I could try to shape policy in a way that was accessible, especially as people get more in tuned with climate change and wanting to understand how policies impact that. So that's what kind of attracted me. And if you're looking to expand your career and want to get more into policy making, I think clearly the money's not as good in the public service, but there is a lot of opportunity to make decisions that are far-reaching and have really important implications. So I couldn't say enough about how important I think it is that we have folks getting in on the ground floor and working their way up. So I will be taking up on the mentor.
It would be awesome, and having women of your caliber helping, mentoring the younger generation, it's very rewarding. I did it for a young woman, and it was fantastic. I recommend it to everyone. Well, we're coming to the end of our session. The hour flew by, I have to tell you, Chairwoman. It's just amazing. But on Ask Me Anything, we end our sessions with this one question that we ask everyone of, and that is, what piece of advice did someone give you, in your career that, and it could be at the beginning, middle, or just the last week, and the most important piece of advice anyone ever gave you, and did you follow it or did you ignore it?
I love this question because I am not shy about the best piece of advice, and I did follow it. So the advice that I received very early on in my career was not to take myself out of the running. And what I mean by that is, I think women in particular, and I alluded to this earlier in our conversation, I think women in particular evaluate their own credentials when they're looking at a job opening and think, I'm not qualified for that, maybe later. And I think universally, I'd say our male counterparts probably don't ask themselves that question. They just apply for it. And I really, really strongly believe that if you take yourself out of the running, you're never going to know. And it's the job of the person screening your resumes to, take you out of the running if they don't think you're qualified. So I clearly have abided by that advice. I think if I had thought to myself 2 years ago, there's no way I'm qualified to run a state agency in a state I've never been to, I wouldn't have put my hat in the ring. And, maybe I wasn't qualified, but here I am. And so somebody thought, I just really don't, I really, really strongly believe that you should not take yourself out of the running. And it would just do, most importantly, yourself a disservice to do so. So I hope that inspires at least someone to, reach for an opportunity that may seem like an overreach to them, but you'll never know if you don't try, right?
Well, Chairwoman, I have to say we are thrilled that you did apply and you did decide to come to Connecticut. Your wisdom and your insight and just the willingness to come on our show today and share with our audience just speaks volumes. So I can't thank you enough, and I'm so glad that when someone do that ask, that you said, you know what, I'm going to go for it, because we've had other women leaders on this program have said similar things, that when a man looks at a job description, if he has 10% of the skill sets, he goes, oh, I can do this job. And a woman looks at a job description and she has to have over 90% before she even puts her CV in for consideration. So I hope the women that are listening, and anyone who's listening, all our young professionals, will understand how important it is to just, what's the worst case scenario, and if you didn't try, you won't even know the outcome. So I can't thank you enough for being on our program today. Thank you for sharing your thoughts on the energy field and us getting to know you. And for everybody who's watching, I want to thank you for tuning in and signing up. Our next program is a FERC Commissioner, Allison Clement. So we're going to get to know her through Ask Me Anything. That's on May 12th. And again, I want to thank our sponsors. That again is Mass CEC, Robinson Coal, First Light Power, and Eversource. Without them, we couldn't do the program we do today. And again, thank you, Chairwoman. And I hope we get to see each other in person and actually, have a cup of coffee together. That would be awesome. And please give your twins a hug and a kiss when you get home with them. I love it. I can't wait to see the pictures. Thank you again, Chairwoman. I really appreciate this.
Thank you.
All right, take care.